The ICU smelled like recycled air and antiseptic, and something underneath both of those that I still don't have a word for. Not death exactly, but the possibility of it, hanging in every hallway. Isla had been in that unit for 11 hours when my phone screen lit up with my mother-in-law's name. I almost didn't answer. But old habits from a decade of trying to keep peace with that woman are hard to break in an instant, even when your daughter is lying unconscious behind a glass wall with a fractured skull and a partially collapsed lung. I picked up. She didn't ask about Isla. She asked about the beach house in Cannon Beach, the family reunion. 2 weeks out, non-refundable deposit, and she expected her granddaughter there. I said very quietly, she's in the ICU. A pause, then what happened? I told her, the parking lot, the car, the airlift, the words critical condition the paramedics had used in a voice I would hear in my sleep for months. Her response came without hesitation. Well, that sounds like the kind of thing that happens when a father isn't paying close enough attention. I pressed my fingers to my eyes. The hallway fluorescent lights buzzed above me. If you're going to be this careless with her, she said, then I'm calling my attorney tomorrow. I've had a petition drafted for months. One call and we reopened the custody case. My hand was shaking when I ended the call. I found her name in my contacts, pressed block, and then I stood there in that buzzing hallway, 40 feet from my daughter's breathing machines, and for the first time in years I didn't feel the old familiar dread of her. I felt something else, something colder and cleaner than fear. 2 days later, when Isla finally opened her eyes, really opened them, focused, present, she looked at me for a long moment like she was making sure I was real. I squeezed her hand, she squeezed back, and then, in a voice that came out as barely a scrape of sound, she said 4 words that turned everything I thought I understood inside out. Daddy, Grandma was there. I want to stop here for a second. If you're listening to this, wherever you are, whatever time it is, just drop a comment and let me know you're with me. Tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone is on the other end of this is the thing that makes it possible to keep going. I'll get into all of it now. My name is Rhett. I'm 31 years old. I teach high school history in Boise, Idaho, and for the past 2 years I've been raising my daughter Isla alone. Isla is 8. She has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and a habit of narrating everything she does out loud, like she's hosting a nature documentary about her own life. And now the explorer prepares her peanut butter sandwich, she announced last spring, spreading peanut butter with enormous concentration. She collects smooth, flat rocks from every place we go. She paints, not the way kids paint, splashing color around to see what happens. She has a whole system for mixing, trying to find the exact shade of things, the exact blue of a winter sky, the exact brown of creek water in late October. She'll work at it for an hour until she gets it right. She is, without any competition, the best person I know. Her mother and I divorced 2 years ago. It was the kind of divorce that happens slowly and then all at once, years of quiet distance. One long argument about everything and nothing, and then it was done. We share legal custody on paper, but in practice my ex-wife travels for work more weeks than not, and Isla has been with me full-time since the ink dried. I don't say that with bitterness. It became the shape of our life, and I'd built it carefully around keeping things stable for her. The one constant threat to that stability was my mother-in-law. She had never approved of me. I knew it from the first dinner at their Portland townhouse, the way she looked at my handshake, my jacket, my job title, history teacher. She repeated it, like I'd said something embarrassing. Her husband, a quiet man who spent most of that first dinner studying the centerpiece, at least offered me a glass of scotch and asked about my students. She offered me a pamphlet about graduate programs. Throughout the marriage, she used money the way some people use weapons. Offered it during the lean stretches when my ex-wife was between contracts, then attached conditions retroactively. The apartment they helped us furnish came with an expectation of Sunday dinners and holiday weekends in Portland. The medical bills they covered 1 year came with my mother-in-law's opinion on Isla's preschool, Isla's diet, and my job prospects. Every gift was a debt you didn't know you owed until she decided to collect. After the divorce, she filed a motion to be named a third-party legal guardian. Her argument, delivered through a lawyer whose hourly rate probably exceeded my monthly take-home, was that I was financially unstable and emotionally unavailable. The motion was denied, but she had told my ex-wife, who told me that she was watching, waiting for something she could use. I thought I understood the danger she represented. I had no idea what she was actually capable of. The Saturday of the accident, I had a migraine, the kind that starts behind your right eye and spreads until light feels like an insult. I'd had them since college. Isla knew the drill, curtains down, quiet voice, let dad sleep it off. But she'd been promised a trip to the capital city public market that morning with the family down the hall. Neighbors she'd spent the previous weekend baking with, their daughter being Illa's closest school friend. I called over, explained I was down, asked if they'd mind. They were happy to take her. I watched her pull on her jacket. She was still explaining the specific rock she was hoping to find, a smooth dark green one from the vendor who sold polished stones, when the door closed behind her. I took my medication and went back to sleep. The call came at 11:43 a.m. A man's voice, steady in that careful way people get when they're about to change your life. He was a paramedic. Had I gotten a call from anyone yet? There had been an incident at the Bora Park parking lot. A child matching Isla's description, with her school ID in her backpack, had been struck by a vehicle. She was unconscious. They were airlifting her to St. Alphonsus Regional. Airlifting. I don't remember getting dressed. I remember being on the highway and the radio was on, and I turned it off because the sound of anything other than silence was unbearable. I remember thinking, she was right in the middle of describing the color she was looking for. The ER was loud and fast, and nothing they told me in the first hour was good news. Skull fracture, small but significant, partial collapse of the right lung, 3 broken ribs, bruising along her left side consistent with low-speed vehicle impact, low speed. I remember thinking how. The doctor's face was practiced and kind and gave nothing away. They let me see her after the first surgery. She looked smaller than she was. Her face was pale and swollen, and she was surrounded by machines that breathed for her. I stood at the edge of her bed and could not make a sound. A nurse named Rhonda, tall, practical, the kind of person who gives you information without softening it past usefulness, explained each monitor in a level voice. She told me I could talk to Isla even if Isla couldn't respond. The brain still registers the voice of someone it loves, she said. That sentence became the only thing I held on to for the next 2 days. I talked to Isla. I told her about the history unit I was teaching, the Transcontinental Railroad, because she'd asked me about it the week before and I'd promised to bring home the book about it. I told her I had the book. I told her we could read it together when she woke up. I told her the neighbor's daughter had asked about her 3 times already. I told her I loved her more than the exact color of anything she'd ever want to find. I was still in that chair when morning came. When the call from my mother-in-law arrived that second morning, the beach house call, the one call to my attorney call, I had been awake for 18 hours. I had eaten a granola bar a nurse had pressed into my hand. I had not showered. I was by any measure the most fragile I had been in my adult life. And she threatened my custody of my daughter, while my daughter was on a ventilator 40 feet away. After I blocked her number, an email arrived within the hour from her attorney's office, a notice of intent to refile the third-party guardianship petition. She hadn't wasted a minute. I set my phone face down on the chair beside me and did not look at it for 4 hours. Something had changed in my chest since blocking her number, a quiet I hadn't expected. Like a pressure I'd been holding so long I'd stopped noticing it had finally released. On the second morning, Rhonda mentioned something in passing, carefully, like she wasn't sure whether to bring it up. Someone had come to the nurse's station asking about Isla. A woman. She hadn't given her name or her relationship to the patient. When asked for a callback number, she had refused and left. I went very still. Because 2 weeks before the accident, Isla had come home from her Thursday evening painting class, quiet in a way that wasn't like her. When I asked what was wrong, she told me there was a woman who kept standing near the fence of the community center parking lot during class, just watching. She had pointed the woman out to the painting instructor, who'd seen her, but assumed she was waiting for someone inside. I had not thought about it since. I had told myself it was nothing. I had let myself believe that. I pulled out Isla's tablet, the kid's model I managed remotely, and checked the device connection logs. 3 weeks back, there were 2 outgoing calls from the tablet to a number I didn't recognize. Portland area code. My chest went cold. I called the number, no answer, generic voicemail, but the area code sat in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't reach. Detective Trevino from the Boise Police Department met me at the station that afternoon. Unhurried, methodical, the kind of investigator who takes notes by hand. When I told him about the woman at the nurse's station, the woman at the painting class fence, the Portland calls on Isla's tablet, he wrote it all down without reacting. Then he asked if there was anyone in Isla's life who might have reason to observe her movements without my knowledge. I told him about my mother-in-law. He pulled up the security camera footage from Bora Park for the morning of the accident. The lot had 2 cameras. He typed in the time window and we watched. At 11:19 a.m., 24 minutes before Isla was struck, a gray Lexus RX appeared on the entrance camera. It circled the lot once, parked in the far corner, sat there for 12 minutes. At 11:31 on the south camera, Isla came running from the direction of the vendor row. Fast, the way a child runs when something has frightened her. She cut between parked cars. At 11:33, the Lexus pulled out of its corner spot abruptly. The driver didn't see Isla crouching behind an SUV. Isla didn't see the Lexus in time. The impact was low speed enough. The Lexus drove out of the lot at 11:34 and did not stop. Trevino zoomed in on the rear plate. The camera angle cut off the final character, but the first 5 were visible. I gave him my mother-in-law's plate number from memory. I'd parked behind her car enough times over the years that it's settled somewhere in the back of my mind. It matched. Every visible character matched. He cross-referenced her cell carrier data through a court order filed that afternoon. Her phone had pinged a tower 0.3 miles from Bora Park at 11:21 a.m. Portland is a 6-hour drive from Boise. She had driven through the night. I was back at the hospital when my ex-wife called. She was crying before I even said hello. She'd gone through her mother's email on an old shared family account they'd never closed. She found a correspondence chain going back 11 weeks with a private investigator based in Portland. The PI had been documenting Isla's weekly schedule, school pickup times, painting class, the Saturday farmers market runs, which neighbors we were close to. My mother-in-law had been building a file. The last email in the chain sent at 4:47 a.m. the morning of the accident. "He's not with her today. I'm going." My ex-wife kept saying she was sorry. Over and over, I believed her. I also could not speak. The third morning, Isla's sedation was reduced. I sat beside her and watched for any movement in her face. Rhonda had told me to be patient. Coming out of sedation isn't like waking from sleep. It's a slow gathering of awareness. I held Isla's hand and talked about the rock vendor at the market, how I'd go back for her. I'd find the one she'd described. Her fingers tightened first, a suggestion of pressure, barely there. Then her eyelids moved. Then they opened, clouded and searching, and eventually found my face. I said, "Hey, Bug, I'm right here." She swallowed hard, her lips moved. I leaned down until my ear was close to her mouth. "Daddy, Grandma was there." My vision blurred. I kept my voice level. "Where, sweetheart, can you tell me?" "At the market." A long pause while she gathered herself. I saw her car. I got scared. I ran. She closed her eyes again after that, exhausted by the effort of 3 sentences. But in those 3 sentences, she had told me everything I needed. I walked into the hallway, called Trevino. He said the plate confirmation had come back that morning. The DA's office had been briefed. There would be a warrant before the end of the day. I was back in Isla's room when my mother-in-law appeared in the corridor outside. She had driven up again. She stood with her coat still on, her posture arranged, looking through the glass at Ila's bed, like she was assessing a situation rather than seeing her granddaughter. When I came out, she turned to me with the composure she had maintained across my entire adult acquaintance with her. The composure of a woman who had never once been held accountable for anything. "How is she?" she said. "She told me you were there." Something moved across her face too fast for me to name. Then it was gone. Children in trauma imagine things. "The parking lot camera caught your car. The plate matches. Your phone data puts you 3/10 of a mile from the lot at the time of impact." I kept my voice flat. "Your own daughter found the PI's emails." Her chin lifted. "Everything I have done has been to protect that child from a father who can barely keep the lights on. You weren't even with her that morning. I rest my case." Behind the glass, Isla's heart rate monitor began to alarm, spiking at the sound of that voice, at the shape visible through the window. Rhonda appeared instantly, read the hallway in one glance, and stepped squarely into the doorway. "This woman needs to leave this ward. Not a question, not a request." As 2 nurses walked my mother-in-law toward the elevator, my father-in-law came around the corner from the opposite direction. He had driven separately. He looked like he hadn't slept since the accident. Gray and loose around the eyes, his coat buttoned wrong. He was holding a manila folder. He steered me into the waiting area at the end of the hall. His hands were shaking. I need you to understand, he said, that I didn't know she would go this far. I knew about the investigator. I told her it was wrong that it was going to. He stopped, pressed his mouth closed, tried again. She said she just wanted documentation, evidence for the petition. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. He set the folder on the table between us. That's the full PI report, her emails, the timeline she built, all of it. I want you to give it to the police. I looked at the folder, then at him. You know what happens when I do that? Yes, he said quietly. I know, give it to them anyway. I did. The arrest came 2 days later at the Portland townhouse. My mother-in-law was charged with felony hit and run, felony child endangerment, and reckless driving causing serious bodily injury to a minor. Based on the documented surveillance, the DA added a stalking charge. She was held without bail the first 72 hours. Flight risk, given the 6-hour drive she'd already proven she was willing to make without telling anyone where she was going. At sentencing 8 months later, she received 22 months in a minimum security correctional facility, 3 years of supervised probation, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of Isla until Isla reached adulthood and could decide for herself whether she wanted contact. The custody petition was dismissed with prejudice. Her attorney withdrew. My ex-wife signed an amended custody agreement giving me sole legal and physical custody the week after the arrest. She came to my kitchen to sign it, sat at the table where Isla does her homework, and said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I told her the truth. I hadn't seen all of it either. We were not going to be close, but we were not going to be at war. That felt like something real and workable, and we've held to it since. My father-in-law left Portland, sold the townhouse, moved to a smaller place in Eugene. He texts occasionally, asking how Isla is doing, whether I need anything. I always answer. He is a man working through what he allowed by staying quiet for too many years, and I think that reckoning is going to be with him the rest of his life. I don't hate him for what he knew and didn't act on fast enough. I understand it more than I'd like to. Isla was in the hospital for 18 days. She came home in early November, the air already cold and smelling of wood smoke from somewhere down the block. She had a follow-up appointment every 2 weeks for the first 3 months. She started seeing a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and had a waiting room stocked with exactly the brand of coloring books Isla preferred. Isla noticed that on the first visit and told me afterward it meant the therapist had done her homework. That was the moment I knew they'd get along. The recovery was not a straight line. There were nights she woke up gasping, and I'd hear her through the wall and be in her doorway before I was fully awake. There were days she didn't want to leave the apartment, days when the sound of a car engine below made her go still and rigid. We worked through each one, slowly, then faster. By February, she was back at painting class. By March, she had finished the canvas she'd been planning since before the accident, the exact color of creek water in October, layered until she got it right. She held it up for me and said, "I think that's the one." It was. In April, she asked if we could ride bikes to the park. I got both bikes down from storage and checked her helmet and tires. We rode 3 blocks to the closest park, a flat one with a paved loop around the perimeter. She went ahead of me, standing on the pedals, her jacket open and catching the wind. She made the loop once, then again. Then she stopped and turned around and looked at me over her shoulder and said, in that narrating voice of hers that she has never once lost, "And now the Explorer has returned to her natural habitat." I laughed until I had to stop pedaling. That evening, I sat on the floor of her room while she painted, and I thought about the last year. I thought about the decade I'd spent managing my fear of my mother-in-law, trying to be acceptable enough, careful enough, financially solid enough that she'd have nothing to use against me. All the ways I'd made myself smaller to keep a peace that was never actually peace. And I thought about that moment in the hospital hallway when I looked at her and felt something colder and cleaner than fear and finally understood. There is no version of small enough that satisfies a person who needs you to disappear entirely. Isla held up her canvas without turning around. "Dad, does this look like April to you?" I looked at it. A wash of pale green and yellow, light breaking through something. Leaves, maybe, or just the feeling of leaves about to come back. The specific weightlessness of April after a long winter. "Yeah, Bug," I said. "That's exactly what it looks like." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to work. I lost a version of family I'd spent years trying to protect. But I found out that the family actually worth protecting had been the two of us in that apartment, with our bikes in the basement, and her rocks on the windowsill, and her voice narrating everything, all along. Sometimes the thing you were most afraid to lose is not the thing worth keeping. Sometimes the clearest act of love you can make is letting it go without looking back. If any part of this landed near something you've been carrying, I'd be glad to hear from you. Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, tell me anything at all. And if you want to stay for more stories like this one, stories about what people are capable of and what we find out about ourselves when we have no choice but to find out, I hope you'll be here for the next one.